Okay, so today we're going to go over how we can multiply binomials mentally. This is chapter 11, section 6 in the AMSCO book. And this still covers AA13, which is add, subtract, multiply monomials and polynomials. So we've seen how we multiply binomials before using FOIL. Today's lesson is going to focus on finding patterns of FOIL in order to multiply binomials mentally. Okay, we're going to discuss 4 different types of binomials that we can find the products of. The first type is the sum and difference of two terms, the product of the sum and difference of two terms. So we have seen this before. The general rule is that when you have the same terms A and B, but one you're taking the difference of and one you're taking the sum of them, and then you're multiplying those, that you take the first term and square it, and you take the second term and square it, and you find the difference of those two terms, that these two things are equivalent. Okay, so for example, if we had x plus 4 times x minus 4, we would take the first term and square it, and we'd subtract the second term squared, which is 16y squared. Okay. Now the second type of binomial that we can find the mental multiplication of is two binomials with the coefficient of the variable term is 1, and then there's a constant. So we have this term here, that's the variable term. The coefficient there is not written, so it's implied that it's 1, and it's being added or subtracted, a constant is being added or subtracted from that variable term with coefficient of 1. So this one, you may have noticed when we were foiling things out. So let's use FOIL for a minute here. So we would use x times x is x squared, x times 9 is 9x, 7 times x is 7x, and 9 times 7 is 63. We added those two terms together, and so our answer was x squared plus 16x plus 63. Okay, so what you might notice is that it's always our trinomials are always x squared plus something times an x term plus a constant. Okay, so the coefficient of the middle term here, of the x to the power of 1 term here, is always going to be the addition or the sum of the constants. Okay, so our general rule is that if we have binomials that look like this, x plus a times x plus b, what's going to happen is that the coefficient of the middle term, right here it was 16, is going to be, if we look back at our two binomials, is going to be the two constants added together, and the constant here is going to be the product of those two constants. Okay, so let's use that to find the mental product of the next term. Okay, so this was x squared plus 16x plus 63. Okay, remember that 16 came from adding 7x plus 9x. So essentially what you're doing, the only shortcut that we're doing here is we're trying to figure out what the o and the I term are and adding them together to get the coefficient of the middle term there. Okay, so this right here, you're going to have an x squared, that's going to be your f term, and your last term, your L term, is going to be 6 times 3, which is 18. It's going to be a plus 18 here. And then the middle term here, the O plus the I term, is going to be that 6x plus 3x, which is 9x. Okay, so again, you can see that if I take 6 and 9, 6 plus 9 is, 6 and 3, 6 plus 3 is 9, and that's going to be the coefficient here. And 6 times 3 is 18, and that's going to be the constant in the trinomial. Okay, so let's figure it out for the next one. Now this is a little trickier because there's subtraction here. So you remember, you want to think in this situation as the a, so the a that's filling in this general rule here you want to think of that as negative 7, and you want to think of b as negative 9. Okay, so a plus b, that's going to be negative 7 plus negative 9, which is negative 16. And a times b is going to be negative 7 times negative 9, which is positive 63. Okay, so our trinomial is going to be x squared. Now remember that this is a negative 16, but I'm going to translate that back into subtraction. And we have this constant of 63 at the end. Okay, so that's our trinomial there. And finally, for the last trinomial in this second case, the second type of binomials, our a term, I want to think of that as negative 3 because it's minus 3, and our b term is 10. So a plus b is going to be negative 3 plus 10, which is 7. And a times b is going to be negative 3 times 10, which is negative 30. So our trinomials are going to be x squared plus 7x minus 30. Okay, now I want you to take a second and notice a pattern here. Our 2 in number 3, we had a negative 7 and a negative 9. And notice that the coefficient in the middle term was minus, because a negative plus a negative is another negative. Oops. And the sign of the last term is positive, because a negative times a negative is a positive. Okay, so that's always going to be the case there. If the two binomials have a difference, then the coefficient of the middle term is going to, or the operation between the second term and the middle term is going to be subtraction. And the operation for the last thing is going to be addition. Okay, that's the result of these two things here. Now, if you have varied operations, so if you had minus and a plus, notice that this is going to be a negative here. That's because a negative times a positive gets you a negative. Okay, and this plus sign here is only because the larger term was a term that was added. If, for instance, I switch this around, if it were x minus 10 and x plus 3, then what you'd have is x squared. Now I'd try to find the sum of negative 10 and 3, and I would get minus 7x, and I'd still have that minus 30. Okay, so notice that's because the difference here was the thing that I was taking away. This term was larger than that term, that constant. Okay, so that resulted in having a negative sign here instead of a positive like it was before. The third type of binomial that we're going to be able to multiply mentally is going to be the square of a binomial. So when I have a square of a binomial, x plus 5 squared, for instance. Okay, so if I had x plus 5 squared, that would just be x plus 5 times x plus 5, right? Because the base of the square is that binomial. So here, again, I could go back to the first type of case where, okay, I have these two constants. So I'm going to have x squared plus, actually this is a type 2 binomial where the coefficient of the variable term is 1, and it's just adding the two constants here. So I find the sum of the two constants, and that's going to be the coefficient of my middle term. And I find the product of the two constants, and that's going to be my constant there. Okay, but what you'll notice is that I can go directly from this form into this form and without doing this intermediate step here, by looking at that 5. Okay, the 5, if I double the 5, I get 10, and if I square the 5, I get 25. So, for instance, if I had the next problem, which is x minus 5 squared, I would have, so instead of the minus 5, I have a negative 5. So I have x squared, and I want to double negative 5. So if I doubled that, I'd get negative 10. So I'd have negative 10x here. Okay? And then if I took negative 5 quantities squared, I'd have 25. So I'd have that plus 25. Okay, so let's just relate this back to what we were saying before. Because this is x minus 5 times x minus 5, and this is a situation where you have a minus and a minus. So if you FOIL these out, your first term is going to be positive. Then you'd have x times negative 5, which is negative 5x for your outer terms. And then you'd have another negative 5x. Well, that's just going to get you negative 10x. And then you have negative times a negative is a positive 25. So again, when they are both minus signs, you're going to have this combination of minus and a plus in your trinomial. Okay? Okay, so let's go back to this page where I have more examples here. So we said this was x squared plus 10x plus 25. Okay, in this situation we have x squared minus 10x plus 25. So the only thing difference is that that's adding, and that is the next one is subtracting. And I could have found this by picking up my a. So the general rule is whatever this constant is, the trinomial is x squared plus double a times x, and it's the square of the constant. And if it's x minus a squared, then it's going to be the exact same thing, but it's going to be minus there. So in other words, this 2a is the coefficient of the middle term with the x on it. Okay, so a in the first case was 5, so a squared was 25, and 2a was 10. Okay, that's why we had the combination of coefficients in our trinomial. And the next one, a was negative 5. So again, a squared is positive 25, but 2a would be negative 10. And again, that's why we had that combination. Oops, I'm missing the x on my term here. Okay. And finally, if the a term is 12 here, then a squared is 144, and 2a is going to be 24. So this is going to be x squared plus 24x plus 144. Here, the a is negative 12, but the square is still the same, but this term will be different. Okay, it's going to be negative 24 instead of positive 24. So we have x squared minus 24a rather, minus 24x, and plus 144. It's identical to the one above it, except this right here is a plus, and this right here is a minus. Okay, so that covers type 3, which is the square of a binomial. Remember, we're just trying to figure out which are the binomials we can multiply mentally. Then we get to type 4, which is the leading term is not 1, or the term of the, shouldn't be called leading term, it's the term, the coefficient of the variable term. When that thing is not equal to 1, then our general rule is to just use FOIL. Okay, so here we have FOIL here. 3x times 5x is going to be 15x squared. 3x times 9 is going to be 27x. Then 7 times 5x is going to be 35x. And 7 times 9 is going to be 63. Oops. So here we're going to add those two together. Let's see, we'd have an x here, 62. So our last, oops, keep writing those wrong. 7 times 9 is 63. Okay, so our trinomial is going to be 15x squared plus 62x plus 63. Okay, we have just a couple more examples. So again, even though one of the one of the variable terms has a 1, there's a 2 for the other coefficient. So we have to just use FOIL here. So our first terms are 2x times 2, which is 2x squared. Our outer terms are 2x times 10, which is 20x. Our inner terms is negative 9 times x, which is negative 9x. And our last terms are negative 9 times 10, which is negative 90. Here those add together to get 11x, so our trinomial is 2x squared plus 11x minus 90. Okay, here our FOIL is 8x times 2x, which is 16x squared. 8x times 3, which is 24x. Then we have negative 7 times 2x, which is negative 14x. And that would be negative 7 times 3, which is negative 21. Okay, these two add together to get positive 10x. So we have 16x squared plus 10x minus 21. Okay, so there's nothing like no shortcut there. But for everything else there was a shortcut. So let's just review quickly the types here. So we had type 1, which is the product of the sum and difference of two terms. So the general rule was we used a squared minus b squared. Type 2 is when you have just a regular, well, not regular, because what's regular really? When you have something like this, where the coefficient of the leading term is 1, the coefficient of the variable term is 1, and you have constants being added or subtracted. Type 3 is the square of a binomial, and type 4 is the type of binomial where the coefficient of the variable term is not 1. You just have to use FOIL.